Before you continue watching this story, check the time on your phone. Because the man in this story did the same thing. When he looked at the clock, it was 3:33 a.m. And that was the moment he realized something terrifying. The doll sitting in the corner of his room was no longer looking at the wall. It was looking directly at him. Before this story begins, there's something you should know. Some objects should never be bought. Some things should never be brought home. Lucas Carter didn't know that when he walked into the underground auction that night. The building looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows. Rusty metal doors. No lights except a faint glow coming from inside. Lucas had heard about the place from a friend who loved rare antiques. They sell strange things there, his friend said. Things collectors would pay a fortune for. Lucas loved strange items. Old cameras, antique paintings, strange relics. But nothing could prepare him for what he saw that night. Inside the building, about 20 people sat in silence. A man in a black suit stood at the front of the room. One by one, he presented items. Old statues. Strange jewelry. A cracked mirror. Then finally, the host brought out a small wooden box. The room suddenly became very quiet. The host placed the box on the table. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a doll. It looked handmade. Its body was stitched from dark cloth. Its mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread. And its eyes were two black buttons. But something about it felt wrong. Lucas leaned closer. The doll's head tilted slightly to the side. Almost like it was looking at him. The host spoke softly. This doll was discovered inside the ruins of an old church. Someone in the audience whispered nervously. Lucas raised his hand. How much? The host looked at him carefully. Then said something strange. You should think carefully before buying this item. Lucas laughed. It's just a doll. The auction ended quickly. Lucas bought the doll for $50. As he was leaving, the host suddenly grabbed his arm. His voice was quiet. Whatever you do, don't fall asleep with it in the same room. Lucas pulled his arm away. That's a weird sales pitch. He walked out into the cold night air. The doll sat quietly inside its wooden box. Lucas drove home, completely unaware of what he had just brought with him. But as the car moved through the dark streets, Lucas thought he heard something from the box. A tiny sound. Like fabric moving. Or breathing. When Lucas glanced into the rearview mirror, the wooden box was slightly open. Lucas arrived home just before midnight. Rain had started falling outside, tapping softly against the windows of his apartment. He placed the wooden box on the table and slowly opened it. The doll sat exactly where he left it. Its stitched mouth curved slightly upward. Like a silent smile. Lucas rolled his eyes. It's just an old toy. He placed the doll on a chair in the corner of his bedroom. Then he turned off the lights and went to sleep. For a few hours, everything was quiet. Then suddenly, Lucas woke up. He didn't know why. The room was dark. The digital clock beside his bed glowed faintly. 3:33 a.m. Lucas rubbed his eyes. Something felt wrong. He looked toward the corner of the room. The chair was empty. Lucas frowned. That's weird. He slowly sat up in bed. Then he heard something. A soft scraping sound. Like cloth dragging across the floor. Lucas's heart began to beat faster. The sound came from beside the bed. Slowly, he looked down. And his blood turned cold. The doll was sitting on the floor. Right next to him. Its button eyes stared directly at his face. Lucas jumped back in panic. What the hell? His breathing became fast. Okay, maybe I moved it earlier. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Lucas grabbed the doll and placed it back on the chair. Then he turned on the bedroom light. The doll sat perfectly still. Silent. Watching. Lucas stayed awake for another hour. Eventually exhaustion took over. He fell asleep again. Morning sunlight filled the room. Lucas woke up slowly. And immediately looked at the chair. The doll was gone. Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Because the doll was now sitting on the edge of his bed. Facing him. And in its stitched mouth, one of the black threads had come loose. Lucas stared at the doll sitting on the edge of his bed. For several seconds he couldn't move. His mind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe he had moved it while he was half asleep. Maybe he was dreaming. But deep down, Lucas knew something was very wrong. The loose black thread on the doll's mouth slowly moved in the air. Like something inside the doll was breathing. Lucas quickly grabbed the doll and stepped back. Okay, that's enough, he muttered. He placed the doll on his desk and pulled out a small security camera from his drawer. Lucas worked as a photographer, so he always had equipment around. If you're moving, I'll see it. He placed the camera on a shelf facing the doll. Then he pointed directly at it. There, he said nervously. Let's see what you do tonight. Lucas left the camera recording. But that night, he couldn't sleep. He stayed in the living room watching television until morning. When the sun rose, Lucas returned to the bedroom. The doll was still on the desk. Exactly where he left it. Lucas let out a nervous laugh. See? Nothing. But something inside him still felt uneasy. So he grabbed the camera and opened the recording. The footage began normally. Hours passed in silence. The doll sat motionless on the desk. Lucas fast-forwarded through the video. Then suddenly, the timestamp appeared. 3:33 a.m. Lucas leaned closer to the screen. The room in the video was completely dark. Moonlight entered through the window. The doll sat still for a moment. Then its head twitched. Lucas froze. No way. The doll slowly turned its button eyes toward the camera. And then something impossible happened. The doll stood up. Its stitched body bent like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Step. 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 It climbed down from the desk. Lucas's breathing became heavy as he watched. The doll walked slowly across the room. But it didn't walk toward the door. It walked toward the bed. The bed where Lucas would normally be sleeping. The doll climbed onto the mattress. Then it leaned down. As if looking at someone lying there. Lucas felt sick. Because the doll began whispering. The audio on the camera was weak, but he could still hear it. A faint childlike voice. Almost empty. Lucas paused the video. What does that mean? But the video wasn't finished. With shaking hands, Lucas pressed play again. The doll suddenly turned its head. And looked directly into the camera. Then it did something far worse. The black thread sealing its mouth began to tear. 1 stitch. 2 stitches. 3 stitches. Slowly, the doll's mouth opened. And something dark began to crawl out. It looked like black smoke. But inside the smoke, Lucas saw shapes. Faces. Human faces. Screaming silently. Lucas slammed the laptop shut in terror. His heart pounded violently in his chest. What the hell did I bring into my house? The room suddenly felt colder. Lucas slowly turned toward the desk. The doll was still sitting there. Completely still. But now its mouth was slightly open. And the loose thread hung down like a broken stitch. Lucas's voice trembled. You weren't like that before. Then suddenly, the doll's head moved. Just a little. Lucas froze. Because the camera in his hands suddenly turned on by itself. And the screen showed the bedroom behind him. Lucas slowly looked down at the screen. His blood ran cold. Because in the camera's live view, the doll was no longer on the desk. It was standing directly behind him. And in the camera screen, the doll's mouth opened wider as a whisper came through the speaker. Now it's your turn. Lucas's heart pounded as he stared at the camera screen. In the live view, the doll stood directly behind him. Slowly, Lucas turned around. The desk was empty. The doll was no longer there. Lucas stepped backward, his breathing shaky. No, this isn't possible. The room felt colder than before. A strange smell filled the air. Like burnt wood and old dust. Lucas picked up the doll with trembling hands. Its stitched mouth was now partly open. The black threads that once sealed it had snapped. Inside the opening, something dark moved. Lucas quickly wrapped the doll in a cloth and shoved it into the wooden box again. That's it, he whispered. I'm getting rid of you. He grabbed his car keys and rushed outside. Rain poured heavily as Lucas drove through the empty streets. He stopped at a bridge far outside the city. Without hesitation, Lucas threw the wooden box into the river below. The box splashed into the dark water and disappeared. Lucas sighed with relief. Finally, it's over. But that night, Lucas woke up again. The digital clock glowed beside his bed. 3:33 a.m. Lucas sat up slowly. Something felt heavy on his chest. His heart froze. The doll was sitting on him. Its button eyes stared into his soul. Its stitched mouth opened wider than before. Lucas tried to move. But his body wouldn't respond. It felt like invisible hands were holding him down. The doll slowly leaned closer to his face. And then, it spoke. Its voice sounded like many voices speaking at once. Children. Men. Women. All whispering together. You can't throw us away. Lucas felt a cold wind enter his mouth. Something dark began to pour out of the doll. Black smoke. Inside the smoke were faces. Dozens of screaming faces. Lucas tried to scream, but no sound came out. The smoke slowly entered his mouth. Lucas's vision blurred. His strength faded. The doll whispered again. Almost empty. Then suddenly, the lights in the room turned on by themselves. The doll turned its head slowly toward the camera on the shelf. And Lucas realized something horrifying. The camera was still recording. The doll stared into the lens. Then it smiled. And the voice from the doll whispered to the camera. Tomorrow, someone else will watch this. The police entered Lucas's apartment 2 days later. A neighbor had reported strange noises coming from inside. But when officers opened the door, the apartment was completely silent. No signs of struggle. No broken furniture. Lucas was gone. Detective Harris walked slowly through the bedroom. Search the place, he told the officers. On the desk, a small camera was still recording. Harris picked it up. Looks like he was filming something. They brought the camera to the station and checked the footage. At first, the video looked normal. Lucas sitting in his room, talking to himself. Then the time on the recording changed. 3:33 a.m. The room in the video suddenly became dark. Lucas sat up in bed. Something small climbed onto his chest. The officers leaned closer to the screen. What the hell is that? The doll stared directly into the camera. Its stitched mouth slowly opened. Black smoke poured out. Lucas's body shook violently. Then the screen went black. The footage ended. Detective Harris frowned. That's some kind of prank. But something about the video bothered him. Later that evening, Harris drove home. He couldn't stop thinking about the doll. The empty eyes. The whispering voice. When he entered his house, something caught his attention. A small wooden box sat on his kitchen table. Harris frowned. I don't remember buying that. He slowly opened the box. Inside sat a doll. Dark cloth body. Button eyes. A stitched mouth. Harris froze. It looked exactly like the doll from the video. He laughed nervously. Very funny. But suddenly, the doll's head tilted slightly. Harris's smile disappeared. The room became silent. Then the clock on the wall clicked. 3:33 a.m. The doll's stitched mouth slowly began to tear open. And from inside it, a whisper came out. Soft. Cold. Hungry. We're still hungry. Harris slowly stepped back. But behind him, the kitchen camera lights suddenly turned on. Recording. The doll turned its head toward the camera. And inside its button eyes, a reflection appeared. Lucas's face. Trapped. Screaming silently. Then the doll looked back at Harris. And whispered one final sentence. You're next. Across the city, in another antique auction house, the host placed a familiar doll on the table and said, starting price, $50. And someone in the crowd raised their hand.